First, I just want to introduce the panel, or who it is that is here this morning. This is just one of the, I think we've done it probably 3 or 4 times already. It's just basically a Q&A tech talk. So it's your opportunity to get through whatever questions or queries or concerns or even statements, compliments maybe even, or for is that wishful thinking? But yeah, get it through and we can chat to it. Who's listening? It's Steve Brown. We all know Steve. We've heard his webinars quite a few times. So too Adrian, so too Marius, Herman Strauss as well. He's not with us currently, but I do believe he's going to join us in a few minutes, hopefully. And then myself, Richard Bailey. And this morning is basically just, as I said, we're going to open it up to the floor, just to have your say, whatever your sort of concerns are that or queries are, or anything technical, even if there are some technical queries that you've come across recently that you're wondering about. So I want to talk a little bit about this slide. And you've probably seen emails, you've probably seen WhatsApp messages on groups and so on. This must look familiar to you. If not, I'm glad, because this is an opportunity to show it to you for the first time. IOPSA and PIRB have started a fund, but they have put up seed money as well, and they started this thing with a little bit of seed money. So they have created this fund, this relief fund for plumbers. Now, how it is, it's by industry for industry, and basically what happens is there's the bank account. You can see it. We are all asked to donate, even if it's $100. That's perfectly acceptable, and it's not going to be for business owners. No, these are guys that have been retrenched or perhaps put on short time. You know, for qualified plumbers, and these guys are the ones taking the strain. So if they've applied and they've said, look, presented their case, look, I'm in need of a bailout, and let's say there's 200,000 rand in this account at the end of the day, and there's 200 people that have, you know, put up their hands and said, look, please, I need some help. It's simple as that. The amount will be divvied up between them equally. There's no like proportioning or anything. It's we divide by 10, goes to 10x. Simple as that. And there's no admin fees. Nobody takes fees from this. Nobody draws salary from this. It's all sort of a pro bono effort. Okay, so none of this money is going to go to anything else except our fellow plumbers. Having said that, I'd like to perhaps just go through to the panel and introduce ourselves. Adrian or Steve. Steve.
Yeah, I'm awake at the moment. Thank you very much, Richard, for the intro, and to Karim, and thank you all for attending this morning. I look forward to a positive Q&A session. Thanks.
Okay, Adrian.
Also alive and well, ready to get going. We sorted.
Gee, that's not, you know, usually when you say Adrian say something, you have to put your timer on for 15 minutes and then, you know, go make a cup of coffee, come back, and then, so well done, Adrian. That's a nice
half an hour.
Yeah. Marius.
Morning, guys. Just a quick reminder, we have a IOPSA regional meeting this evening for the Southern Cape. It's going to be the first online meeting. So if the Southern Cape guys are listening, just a reminder, 5 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm going to be there. So is that a hindrance or a help to your cause, Marius? I'm not sure. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that.
But you'll be
I'm
back
not exactly sure about this.
You'll be sleeping, Richard, at 5 o'clock this afternoon. So you're safe, Marius.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure if Herman's in the room yet. But if he is, Herman, are you there? Not yet? No. Okay. All right. Well, Karim, I'm not sure if there are any questions, that have come up.
There are a few questions, so I'll just go through them. So the first question is, other than paint, what else can be painted on lagging that is on the outside of a building?
Can I grab that one?
Please.
We'll find that if you go to, without names dropping, you can go to the Armorflex and Superlon websites. You'll find that they've got a specific code for, firstly, they mention that the lagging is non-UV, and then they've got a specific code for a paint that they provide for painting onto the lagging to make sure that it actually is protected. But in the same breath, they refer you to the fact that you know that you're supposed to do this lagging thing once a year to make sure that it's hasn't been eaten by birds or whatever. And then just from a little bit of experience locally, the guys use an aluminium tape. It looks like a normal masking tape, but it's a little thin aluminium foil. So if it's a small enough piece, you can actually just wind that aluminium tape around there to keep the sun off it.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a tricky question, because it's almost left up to the discretion of the installer, because the standards don't point out, or they're not particular about what you use to protect the lagging. All they say is that the lagging must be adequately protected. So it's almost up to you. And I mean, you see it from one extreme to the other. So you see a couple of coats of paint, which actually is fine as long as it's maintained on an annual basis, let's say. And then you go all the way up the scale to a stainless steel hard outer shell, which is formed and put in place, so that's also adequately protected. But do we have the means, the funds, to do that every time? Certainly not. So it's anything in between. I think it's the balance that personally, it's the paint option, whether it's never mind what type of paint, that's debatable, but the paint on option to me seems quite an easy one. Perhaps it's messy. Perhaps somebody is looking for something a little bit neater, and if so, yeah, I suppose it's up to our discretion.
From a building perspective, being in the building trade myself, I think it's quite difficult to start painting lagging on a roof which is colored, a tiled roof, and you start messing on that roof, or you're trying to get in beneath the lagging if the pipe is like flush to the tiles. So that could create challenges. So when the guys do the pipe work, sort of try and navigate those challenges beforehand, decide before if you're going to paint it, whatever the case may be. And then on the paint type, I would just maybe state that a PVA is not acceptable because it's porous and it actually absorbs water to a certain extent. So you need to have, and I think you mentioned it in your presentation, Richard, on lagging, acrylic-based paint, anything with a bit more plasticity in it than a PVA.
Aircon suppliers sell lacell tape. Is that acceptable if it covers all the lagging?
I would say absolutely. Look, as we say, the standards don't specify the type of coating or covering. All they say is that it must be adequately protected against UV and the ingress of moisture. So that is a subjective thing. So you're going to have to go to site, look at an installation, and make your own mind up whether or not that fulfills or meets those requirements.
So before we get going on to the next question, I see there was a very valid comment made on the list coming in. The gentleman says that if you look at SANS 10400 XA 4.1.4, it says thermal insulation, if any, shall be installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. So when it comes to protecting that piece of foam from UV, just make sure that you look at what the manufacturers want done for their lagging.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, and then the next question is, as a sole proprietor owned plumbing business, can I still apply for a permit for work to be able to do emergencies from next week Monday?
Look, there has been a challenge in terms of sole proprietors. There was a document that came out from IOPSA in terms of how that is done, because when you were going through the process through government to get those permits, they didn't recognize it. But as far as I am aware, there was a document that was circulated out earlier this week. So Karim, if that individual can make contact with me afterwards, then I'll be able to share that document or get it shared through. So yes, there were challenges in terms of that, but I think there was movement in terms of how individuals that were sole proprietors could register.
Yeah, I know in Mossel Bay specifically, the municipality, the human resource manager is actually looking after the permits in that instance for sole proprietors. Ibrahim Patel actually mentioned that, I've got actually a screen clip of his TV interview where he says that sole proprietors do not need a permit. But I know some municipalities are sort of enforcing that you have a permit which comes from them if you're a sole proprietor. So maybe that individual can just check with his municipality to see if they can assist him there, because they've got systems in place to give a permit like that as well.
Okay, and then the next question is interesting question asked by Mercedes-Benz from the SABC to ministers on why she must use a qualified plumber and why she can't use a local guy who's been doing it for years. Awaiting the answer, Minister Patel's answer boggles the mind. Says regulation does not make provisions to only use a registered plumber.
Yeah, I think in terms of where it is, let's just be very clear. The standards in terms of who can be in 10400 A18 is very specific in terms of what the requirement is of a plumber. In terms of the relevant standards, the same sort of thing applies. So, maybe that statement has just been made without sort of thought or whatever the case may be, or lack of understanding of what everything is. So that's where it is, and that's where it remains. We all know what a plumber is. I mean, it's like saying, do I have to go to my GP, or why do I have to go to a GP and then to a specialist, or vice versa? So we could apply it whatever it is, but the standards are very clear in terms of who can and who can't practice the trade of plumbing.
Okay, and then the next question is, for young plumbers, what reading material is out there? Example, correct type of fittings to use, below ground pipes, rod eye, how many meters apart, plumbing tricks, etc.
Your most reliable reading material would be a South African national standard. We see books, we see comments, we see articles around plumbing relating to some of the other person's opinion or experience or whatever, as good or bad as that might be. If you're looking for proper, informative, correct reading material, you start off by getting yourself a copy of the national standards. Go onto the website, order the thing, pay for it, get it. You'll use it for the rest of your life. You're talking about positioning of rodding eyes and all the rest of that. It gets explained in absolute detail. So my suggestion would be, when it comes to reading material, be very particular and make sure that when you do buy a document, or you do buy something to read, that it is actually something that would last you forever and not just be an opinion or an article.
Yeah, 100%. I knew that everybody in this panel would say that would have the same answer to that, and that is 100% correct. The standards are your Bible. That is where you know what the rules and regulations are of plumbing. Having said that, the tricks of plumbing and the practicalities and the on-site experience is something that you need to pick up in your apprenticeship or your learnership years. And even at the end of that, there's a vast amount of knowledge that cannot be taught in that time. But the basics should be there. If you have the basics and you have the knowledge set in the form of the South African national standards, and you read them, and if you don't know how to, and you don't want, or you're not that way inclined, or whatever the case may be, pick up the phone and phone myself or Adrian or Steve. We are all available, and get us to help you navigate your way through the standards and how to read them and how to apply them. Then the third tier would be for you to start attending little baby webinars and these tech talks and that sort of thing, because very often we see a chat about how to navigate the standards, what the importance of a standard is, what the importance of understanding what this, and then it drills down to detail. So that's, you just take a couple of steps. So standards, talk to people and check out these tech talks and little webinars. You don't have to go and blow 10 grand on webinars or whatever. Just do the tech talks, do the little things, and it'll start opening up for you.
Yeah, I think also, Richard, the other thing, you know, from an IOPSA point of view, and we do understand that the standards are very, very expensive and maybe out of reach in terms of the average sort of guy out there, you know, if we look at what those costs are. But I think, you know, and during there's a wealth of information out there in terms of, you know, as an example, IOPSA put some practical guides together. They're very sort of inexpensive in terms of getting there, which is a starting point. And then also, you know, as you're going out there and you're seeing products, I mean, most of the products that I look at that have been either SANS approved or whatever, or meet the standards, the wealth of information and detail that they put together in terms of, you know, geysers and vacuum breakers and everything else. So, you know, the first thing is check, is it an approved product? Yes. Then go and have a look at it, and then just start going through, and Google is your friend. And although you'll find some dodgy stuff out there, but if you see the product and you know that that product is in the market and it's a recognized, the wealth of information in terms of what comes through from the manufacturers. If I've just taken, I'm not name dropping, but if I look at some of the details that come through from Quickots and from Lixors and from others, from Heattech, you know, in terms of how those things should be installed. So it really is good. I mean, my apprentices were told, if you take something out of a box, you know, there's a thing in there that, you know, how it should be installed. And we would create a file that the apprentice would put that in his file, a little A4 file, whatever it was, and just keep all of the instructions and the manuals and things that came with it, and started building their own. So that's an idea, and very inexpensive in terms of how you can actually put your own one together and do it. So anything in terms of what you do is a good start. So for that individual that asked that question, well done that you've got such a mind that wants to just grasp and learn. So well done.
They must just be careful when they go to Google. It's good to go there, but then sometimes you end up and it looks like our site, a South African site, and it's actually a New Zealand or Australian site. They have a lot of the same sort of standards. So remember, they don't apply to us always, but yeah, it's good to have a look at their stuff as well and do cross-reference. But remember, always, you know, if you find something on Google, make sure that it pertains to our standards when you are reading it. But it's very good to go onto Google, and especially if you're looking for sort of practical assistance as well. There's a lot of videos on there that give you practical assistance on how to do some certain jobs as well, fault finding, leak detection, stuff like that as well.
So in short, explain SANS codes in a practical way that we can use on site.
So yeah, I mean, there have been, and IOPS have put out a couple of practical guides like that take the SANS standards, condense it, and sort of pluck out the necessary stuff as a field guide. However, please don't consider that sort of thing, and it's as great as it is, and as good as it is, and as helpful as it is, it's never going to be complete. It is all positive, 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 until the day that somebody asks you a particular question and it's not contained in that document. So you always have to, that is something that I would say is a supplementary source of information. Your basis is always going to be the standards. And unfortunately, guys, this is the trade you're in. And this trade requires that you have an understanding of the standards. And that is a multitude of documents that you have to sit and look at. That, unfortunately, is your chosen profession. And that is what, it's part of it. So there have been attempts made to put in place guides and things to ease us into this. But at the end of the day, our base needs to be those documents.
The next question is a relatively long one. So the question is it possible sometimes to explain how to do certain installations step by step? We always see photos of how not to do things. It's easy to do fault finding, but that's on a building site. Don't have it so simple. Explain how, for example, to install a waste pipe with a trap in the wall.
Yeah, if I can just come in there. So just to, you know, put everybody in the picture, just before COVID, I was working with PIRB, IOPSA in terms of putting a couple of induction videos together. One being in terms of, again, we all know geysers, but, taking the geyser, how it should be installed, wall mounted, whatever. Unfortunately, that was curtailed due to the COVID-19, but it's certainly something that we're looking at in terms of putting these things together. And then, through that installation, start looking at other challenges in terms of heights and where there's a one-way valve between the pressure control valve and the geyser. So we put those scripts together, but unfortunately it was curtailed until such time as COVID-19 is over and we can start traveling and putting things together. But it is definitely something that we put a budget towards, and then start to unpack and identify those short clips in terms of step 1, step 2, step 3. So it is a work in progress. Good question. And I think it'll go a long way in terms of explaining different scenarios and visual in terms of how things should be done. So there is a group of people that are working with it. Herman, myself, my hand down the south coast, Lorraine, and a few others that have worked together, putting the program together for us to be able to roll that out. So yes, thank you. It is in progress, but our hands are tied at the moment.
There were a couple of aspects to this question. When you're saying you would like to build a trap into a wall, the standards require you to have full access to that trap at all times. So there's a couple of things that, like a vent valve under a window, it's not allowed. So if we look at what the standards say around putting it up, yes, I agree. We could possibly add 1 or 2 more positive pictures that shows you how it's supposed to be done or how it's supposed to end up looking. But when it comes to the standards, the positive or the actual installation bit comes from that document. This is how you install this. This is why you need this fitting. This is why you don't put a vent valve under a window. The point is that if the standard says you do not put a vent valve under a window, it is a requirement. So we'll show you one that is actually under a window so you can grasp the concept of this thing actually letting out foul air into the building or causing an inconvenience. So I hear what the gentleman is saying, but the correct bit, or for a qualified or a licensed plumber to look at the standard, and the standard says the same rules apply to a vent and a vent valve, then that, if you've worked through those points, then that is the how to do it. The how not to do it are the pictures. Those are the ones that cause the guys to actually look at it and you go, I've seen that before, or next time I walk away from a job, this thing looks like the one that we saw on that webinar, so it shouldn't be right. So yes, I agree with what you're saying, Steve, but also the question, or the bits that I picked up out of the question, there's about 3 or 4 do not do's that was included in that thing there. So we just need to make sure that we're heading in the right direction.
The next question is, must a non-electric solar geyser have a vacuum breaker on hot and cold?
When you say non-electric, there wasn't a stipulation as to whether this solar geyser was a pressure geyser, a closed, unvented type geyser. So whether it's electrically backed up or not actually doesn't make a difference. What does make a difference is what type of geyser it is. Is it an open vented geyser? Is it a 0 kPa gravity fed geyser? Is it a closed vented geyser? But the answer is, if it's a closed geyser or pressure geyser, as per 10254 or as per 151, SANS 151, then it must have a vacuum breaker on both the cold inlet and the hot water outlet.
Okay, and then the next question is there any way one could advise the manufacturer of the geyser thermostat component, the degree markings be made in a different color to make it more visible on the thermostat?
I would actually suggest that gentleman, if it's that big a problem in his area, that they maybe contact the manufacturer of that geyser. It's the first time I hear about this complaint. So like I said, unfortunately, Jaswick would be listing compliant products. We won't be approaching manufacturers to change the color scheme on their system.
I think the thing with a thermostat is that it's not just used for geysers. It's used on different other appliances as well. So it's like a generic part that is used all over. So if they start putting a color scheme onto it, it might not apply to some other industry like bain-maries and stuff like that, where they also use exactly the same sort of thermostats. Maybe something that I can suggest, as well as once your guy has installed the geyser, is to take a photo as well, because that is a good reference to where the temperature setting is, and then you as the owner can check and make sure that they're setting it correctly, or take an old thermostat, mark it yourself, and get them to have that photo with them so they can see where to set it, because that is quite a problem I've seen in the industry where the guys go out, they install the geyser, tomorrow the owner wants it because it's not the same temperature. So that is very important, and also for your self-protection. If something goes wrong, the geyser is overheating because it's a faulty thermostat, and you've got a photo to show that when you left the site, it was set at exactly the right temperature. You cannot be held liable for that.
Okay, and then the next question is, if you have a service shaft in the middle of the house, can you use one safety valve outlet pipe for 2 geysers if there's no space for 2 outlet pipes?
No, it's a short answer. No. The standard, if you read it, it says you cannot interconnect these things. Each geyser is an entity on its own. So you have one discharge pipe for the safety valve, one for the expansion relief, and one for the tray. There's no interconnections of nothing anyway.
Yeah, no, that's right. So if I think there's two. It's a multifaceted answer. So let's assume that it is possible to separate those two. If it is possible in any way, shape, or form, then it must be done. Because the short answer is no. It cannot. You cannot use a common discharge pipe for 2 geysers. That's simple. Having said that, what if it's physically impossible? Okay, so then you need to explore all kinds of other options. What about relocating the geyser? Now, you say something like that, and immediately the response is, oh my word, you mean I must take this whole geyser and put it somewhere? Yes, that is what must happen, because geysers need to be installed in certain ways. Okay, so if you can't relocate the geyser, if you cannot get an additional safety valve discharge pipe in there, if it is physically impossible for you to rectify this thing, then the standards do allow for you to have looked at it, noted it, and said to Mrs. Jones, I'm sorry, it's impossible for me to make this thing compliant for the following reasons. Please acknowledge this, and here is a notice to you of the non-compliance of this installation. You cannot issue that notice on something, especially like a safety valve, when you haven't exhausted every other option. You have to have gone and done due diligence and made sure that, in fact, you as the installer, for you, it's impossible to rectify this. And if it's impossible, then you can issue that thing.
Then also, Richard, again, we need to take it where, and I think that's where the question goes back to, is we also have to take in the safety factor. So as we've discussed in previous, is that where it's virtually impossible, we've got to look at that installation and say, okay, we can't make it compliant, but how can we make it safe? So long as the client is aware of it and that you've done all due diligence. That's really where it boils down to. So there are those in the middle of flats and that are impossible to relocate. There's no provisions made, etc., but it's look at it and say, okay, what is the lesser of 2 evils? Do you not connect the TP valve, or do you, and you bring it down safe? So I think each one on its merit, guys, as we go through, is have a look at it, go through the same procedures that Richard's done, but look at it from a safety point of view and say, okay, it cannot be compliant, but I can actually get it safe.
And then obviously there's the other option of a rational design. So then you can approach an engineer to see, if it's, for instance, a support problem, an engineer can do the design and redesign the support, or actually the piping as well. So that's the other option.
So the next question is, on solar geyser installation, should you only use conics?
There's 2 answers. The first one is my opinion, and the second one is what the standards say. What the standards say is that within a meter of the solar collector, you cannot use soft solder Copcal capillary fittings. That's what they say. They don't tell you what type of fittings to use, although we all know that it's going to be a conics fitting. But what they say is within a meter of the solar collector, you may not use the soft solder capillary type fitting. So that's a full stop there. It's within a meter. How effective is that? So my opinion is that the within reason, if it's a very long loop fine. But if it's a reasonably short loop, I don't believe that you should be using capillary fittings in any event. But if it's a long loop and it's a split system and your tank is removed from the collector for 4 or 5 meters perhaps, then yes, of course you can start using capillary fittings closer to the geyser. But to answer the question, the standards don't allow it within a meter of the collector.
Okay, and then just one last question for this session before I end off. Does IOPSA or PIRB follow up on reports of non-compliant geyser installations?
So yes, okay. So if there is a complaints portal, so let's just go. It's again a multifaceted sort of question. So in the event that the consumer has an installation done and it's been reneged by warranty, and there was a COC issued on that installation which hasn't been audited, then there is a process in terms of bringing that through. The PIRB process, audit process, has a facility there to engage in terms of that. So the answer to that question is yes. If a COC was issued, it has not been audited, there's a complaint or query or issue with regards to the installation, then if it's done through in the correct format with regards to in writing, etc., and the motivation, and it comes from the homeowner, then they will act on it. If, for example, you go to a site and there's been no COC issued and you can see that it is non-compliant, you can also, again, with the details of the plumber, because again, we need, in order for us to have that, it has to be fact, it has to be in writing, and it has to be done in the formatted requirements in terms of the documentation. So it is there that you'll be able to report it. It is done anonymously. So again, we're looking at the facts and figures and everything else that goes with it. So yes, there is a process to go through that in terms of issuing non-compliance, reporting non-compliant installations.
I think, just looking at the comments and questions here, there's a lot that we didn't cover. Obviously, time restraints. I hate leaving stuff unanswered, and people walking away from this session thinking, oh, geez, they didn't even get to my question. So.
And I always like these sessions because it gives the guys a point of reference. So maybe we continue this next week Thursday.
That's a good idea.
And any more that the guys have, I'm quite happy to extend this tech talk to next week Thursday. Let's deal with these questions that we have and any others that come forward.
Sounds like a plan.
Sure. Happy with that. And the other thing is this, if I recall correctly, Karim will actually send out an email with all the unanswered questions in any event, so we can just then decide who answers what, and we can get it sorted for next week.
Okay.
Perfect. But I think if we kick off with those next week, because I think all of these questions that are coming through are going to be of interest to everybody else. So let's kick off with those next week, and then we'll start answering those and then go into any new ones. But well done, guys. Thank you very much. Karim, really great having you on board with us every morning, and to the team, Richard, well done.